Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this Outdoor Art Club presentation. I'm Kathleen Taylor, and I'm working with Deborah Duck today to bring you our program on a Zoom platform. Every year, the Outdoor Art Club runs a public speaker series so that people like you can learn about topics as diverse as the biology of belonging and today's program, American Masterpieces, Artistic Legacy of California Indian Basketry. Before I turn this program over to today's program chair, please note that Zoom has two different functions, one for chat and another for Q&A. Please use the Q&A function only to send questions to Sherrie anytime during her presentation. She looks forward to answering them at the end of the program. Now, I'm pleased to turn this over to Dina Eisenhardt and introduce her as our program chair for today. Hi, Dina.
Thank you so much, Kathleen, for the introduction to our guest speaker, Dr. Sherrie Smith-Ferri. I am Dina Eisenhardt, your program chair today, and I'm also the Cultural Arts Committee chair. I met Sherrie at the Hillsburg Museum exhibition, and she was the guest speaker back then. And I was so interested and about the exhibition, and I was talked to Sherrie after that, and invited her to our speaker series. So here she is, and so thank you, Sherrie, for your generosity and time today. And so I will exit for now, and I'll see you at Q&A so that Sherrie can start her program. So please welcome Dr. Sherrie Ferri Smith. Thank you.
Thank you, Dina, and the Outdoor Art Club. And I'm going to see if I can start sharing my screen and getting a Zoom presentation up. And so hopefully you can all see that. So I'm really going to talk about Pomo Indian baskets, really an American masterpiece art form that is centered right here in California, Northern California. And tell you a little bit to start out about myself. So just for those of you that don't know where Pomo Indian people live, this is just a sort of a snapshot view of our part of California. So you can see we're just a little to the north of Marin County, essentially Pomo Indian peoples, and there's a number of tribes of groups or communities of Pomo Indian peoples. We live in Sonoma County, Lake County, and Mendocino County, essentially. And the divisions that you see right here are basically where the speakers of Pomo languages live. And so we don't share just one language, there's 7 languages. So we're a fairly diverse group in a small area. And this is my particular homeland. I come from Dry Creek, Pomo, Bend, and this is actually Dry Creek. This is where one of our ancestral village sites used to be. And I say used to be because it is now under Lake Sonoma. When the dam was built there and Lake Sonoma was created, it flooded the majority of our homelands. I'm lucky that I was able to really spend a lot of time in those homelands when I was younger, before that happened. And this is the little baby in the baby basket, and that's one form of Pomo Indian basketry. The very beginning for a lot of us is my grandmother, Lucy Lozinto Smith, and she's there in Healdsburg Plaza with her uncle, Jim Shackley. And she is the person that I learned most about Pomo basketry from. And the picture, family picture that was taken when my Uncle Russell was off to World War II. So he's the tall man in the left-hand side of the photo, and you can see my grandma and her husband, Stephen Smith. They're in the middle, and my dad, Bill Smith, is in the back right-hand corner. And that is me. I was very young out in Dry Creek Valley, and that's my grandma, Lucy, holding me there. And there she is. She was a basket maker. Didn't have time to do it for much of her early life, really toward the end of her life when she'd raised her children. She went back, and that is really the time that we spent together, and where I started learning about baskets. And Pomo baskets have been my passion for many, many years, and I've traveled all over the world to see them. And that usually is how Pomo basket, learning how to make Pomo baskets is taught. It's from one generation to another. And here you have, this is Annie Burke, who's the mother of a well-known weaver, Elsie Allen, teaching her niece how to weave. And I wanted to start talking about Pomo Indian baskets from their beginnings, and these are their beginnings. It's the plants. I talked about Pomo Indian baskets as being just world-renowned, world-recognized art form. Pomo Indian baskets, many people think, are really the best that any people have ever made. And the basis for that judgment is really the fact that Pomo Indian people use more different kinds of techniques to make a basket than anybody else ever has around the world and throughout time. And I think you see the finished product usually in museums, but you don't really, most people, if they haven't made baskets, don't think about where they start. And they start from the plants, and it's plants that we're fortunate enough to live in an area in the world here in California that just has an extensive native flora. We're a center of botanical diversity here in this part of California. And that really enabled Pomo peoples to experiment with all the plants in the region and to really, over time, settle on the plants. They had just this variety to choose from, and were able to settle on plants that were both looking for plants that are strong, that are flexible. You need this kind of unique set of qualities together. And often those qualities are found in places of parts of the plant that people don't normally think of using. When I talk to groups and I would show them plants and ask them, well, what part of the plant do you think is being used to make baskets? Normally people think of essentially kind of the blades, the leaves. And in this is one of our major plants used to make baskets. It's called sedge, S-E-D-G-E. Some people call it cut grass because it has really sharp edges if you run your hands along them. But what you're using, and it grows along the river. And this is kind of along the bank of Dry Creek again, as this is what they call a sedge bed that tends to grow together. It likes the water. And the part that you're really using in the plant is the roots. And so people don't really think about using roots, but they're very, very strong, very flexible. And you're not using the roots that feed a plant. You're using a root here. If you can see this diagram, there's what we call the runner root. It's growing along horizontally in the ground. And it's a part of its only job. It's part of a plant whose only job is to start another plant. So if any of you grow strawberries, you know, you're used to seeing plants that will reproduce this way. It's the same exact thing. And what the weavers are doing when you dig for the roots is you're going to go down in the ground by the base of one plant and feel around. Here you are. This is Elsie Allen, this is exactly how you dig sedge roots. You just sit on the ground and you're out there digging at the base of one of them. And this is what you're looking for. That's the base of a plant. And you can see these kind of golden sort of ropes almost looking in the ground. And they have these rings around them. That's the runner roots. It's going from the base of one plant out to the baby plant. And what you're doing is you're harvesting the root in between. So I think one of the common misconceptions, often people will say, oh, you know, you're harvesting all these roots, and there's this assumption that you're hurting the plant while you're doing it, but you're not bothering the plant's roots that actually really feed the plant. You're just taking a piece of this plant that is going to deteriorate in the ground anyway. Once its job is done to start a new plant, it will decompose in about 2 or 3 years. And so the whole process of harvesting the plants, there's a number of things. It's almost like gardening. There's a number of things you do in that process that's helping. You're getting helped because you're getting the roots. The plant is getting helped because you're aerating the soil, and you're making it less compacted. It helps the roots to be able to grow. You're getting rid of rocks, and you're sort of weeding as you're doing this, getting rid of competing plants. You're thinning them out sometimes to help them be less crowded. So there's a lot of things that you're actually doing in the process of harvesting that increase the plant's sort of health and vigor. So plants that basket makers use are much healthier than plants they're not being used and cultivated. Essentially, you're gardening these plants. And the kind of material in the end that basket makers are using is not natural growth. So while these are native plants, kind of growing out in the wild, you have to work with those plants as a weaver for at least 2 or 3 years before you're getting the kind of material and the quality of the material that you need to really make good basketry from. So Grandma used to always go, you know, you can't buy the materials in the store. You can't go out to Walmart and get them. The other thing you can't do, though, is you can't just walk out to the forest and harvest them. So that's, I think, a part of the whole process that's really not understood widely. And it takes a long time to process these plants. So this is the sedge root once you've dug it up and you've snipped it between the two ends of the plant, the parent plant and the baby plant. The first thing you're going to do is split it in half. And you can see this process right there. This is Laura Summersall, a really well-known Pomo basket maker. And this is her splitting roots. She could split them so much faster than I ever could. You just takes a lot of experience and time to get really good at processing your materials, but she was a master, and she's doing what many weavers do, is holding it in your mouth. And then once you've split the root in half, the next thing you have to do is you have to take the outer bark, that sort of golden reddish colored bark, off. And the part of the plant you're going to use to weave with is just that inner root core. And it's, if you're processing it right away, it just separates and sort of pops off. And you could see the one being pulled out from the other. And this is Laura Summersall again, and she's just, you can just pull it through your hands and it just comes right off, if you know what you're doing again. And then you coil those up and you set them aside for at least a year, because when you're weaving, all of these plant materials that you're going to make the basket from, you have to let them dry enough so that all the moisture, the water content in them is gone. It's like building with green lumber. You can't do a good job if you're building something and the lumber hasn't been dried. Same thing in a basket. You can't make a basket from materials that have, some wetness still in them, because they'll dry in the basket. They'll shrink up, they'll cause gaps. They'll make it sort of pull and warp. You just can't make a good basket that way. So everything, all these different materials, all need at least a year of curing before you're even ready to weave. Sort of the other kind of plant part that gets used a lot in pomo baskets are branches or shoots. So basically you're using roots and shoots to make baskets. And this is a kind of plant you often see growing, I think, along the highways. In the springtime, you'll see these plants that have this covered with bright sort of fuchsia colored, sort of little pea blossom looking flowers. And those are red buds. And so Western red bud is, again, one of the major materials. This is a material that you use to make basket designs from. So it's instead of that sort of golden color that the sedge roots are, this is a reddish, dark reddish brown color. And you could see that bark between the, on this shoot, between the flowers. That's what you're using in the baskets. And you're using it for that color. And you're harvesting it. This is the color it makes in the basket. You could see the dark brown color in these bands. And you could see in the bands, there's also a brighter, lighter color. Both of those come from using the red bud bark. And here you can see coils of the red bud bark. You're harvesting in the wintertime. When all the flowers and leaves have dropped off, you're cutting the shoots after there's a few hard frosts. And then you're splitting the bark out. And you keep splitting it down to the thickness you want. And then again, you're setting them aside to dry. And you'll see in these, if you look on the inside of those coils, you'll see this kind of reddish brown color. If you look on the outside of the coil, you'll see that it's a tan or a whitish color. And that's because you have that bifaced color nature in this material. One side has the red, one side has that white. And you saw both of those in that basket band. So just a little bit about two, and there's like 7 or 8 different kinds of plants that are used in pomo basketry. Those are 2 of the main basket materials, and just want you to have a little idea of the time, the care, and the environmental knowledge that basket makers are bringing to this process. So you have to have some idea about plant biology and know kind of the life cycle and how plants are going to react to human intervention. What's going to happen when you prune them, which is one of the things you need to do when you're harvesting the branches, to get long, straight, kind of fine, regular growth in your branches. You don't want them to branch off of each other. You don't want them to taper too much. You want them all just as much of a regular diameter as can be. You want them to be really flexible. There's all these things that you are doing when you're interacting with the plants to get them to produce the kind of growth again that you need for basketry. So if you're a basket maker, you're also a botanist and really an environmental scientist, and as well as an artist. So I think it's a miracle that when basket makers are able to take whatever these kind of really pretty shaggy plants out in the wild and make something as uniform and exact and beautiful as pomo baskets are. So that is really one of the overlooked, I think, skills and talents that's necessary in that process. And this is a painting by a Western artist called Grace Hudson, who I've actually know quite well because I used to work at the museum that's dedicated to her and Pomo Indian peoples in Ukiah, California. And if you would like to go somewhere and see her paintings and see just a wonderful collection of Pomo Indian baskets, it is up in Ukiah, California. And it's not that far from Mill Valley, so I encourage you to go there. But this is one of her paintings, and it's called The Dowry. And it shows a young woman who's getting married, and part of what happens in the marriage is an exchange of presents between the families, and often those consist of baskets, and this is her dowry. And it's a great depiction of just the variety of Pomo Indian baskets. And so again, we talked about Pomo Indian baskets, Pomo Indian basket makers as just this, using this amazing diversity of techniques. And it starts basically in terms of techniques. If you want to simplify things, there's two main ways to make a basket around the world and throughout time. You can make a basket utilizing foundation rods, foundation that is going to run essentially vertically up the walls of a basket. And that's called a twine basket. And you have weaving materials that are then kind of working back and forth between those foundation rods. And this is a picture, again, of Laura Summersall working at the beginning of a twine basket. And probably the best way to visualize a twine basket and how it's being constructed is to think of a spider web or to think of the spokes of a bicycle wheel. So those are the foundation rods radiating out. And then again, the weaving material weaving back and forth between those to construct the wall of the basket. And this is what it looks like when it's started. Again, this is, you start out with it sort of being this big flat disc, and then often it's being kind of turned up, brought up into a bowl shape, into some other shapes, but it often ends up looking somewhat like this. And so this is Pomo weaver Josepha Dick from Ukiah Rancheria up here in Ukiah area. And she's getting close to the end of the basket, and you can see how those foundation rods have been turned up and they're all there at the top. And again, they're running up vertically on the walls of the basket, and the sewing material is the weaving materials going back and forth between those to form the wall of the basket. So there's 7 different kinds of twining that Pomo Indian people are doing when they're creating their basketry, and often they're essentially choosing between these techniques that they're using for various either functional reasons or aesthetic reasons. So depending on what they want the basket to do and how they want the basket to look, they're choosing different techniques to use. And often, especially in twine baskets, you'll find, multiple weaving techniques, twining techniques in that same basket. And they can run from really big. And this is, again, at Ukiah Rancheria, this is a group of kids having fun in a storage basket outside. And I guess this would be outdoor art, like your club is focusing on. A lot of the big baskets, kind of what you would call the work baskets, are being made by men. So while the majority of baskets, Pomo baskets, are woven by women, Pomo men made baskets too. And they made baskets that were involved in the jobs that they did, which were usually hunting and fishing. And so this is a basket that's being a twine basket that's made by this man, and it's being used to fish with. If you look behind him, you see this sort of woven fence that's going across the river. And the baskets, when the fish are running, when the salmon and the steelhead are heading back from the ocean up the creek and the streams, that fence will stop the fish. And the baskets are placed in front of it. So when the fish can't go up, they're kind of sent through these double-mouthed baskets. This is one of them in profile. It's 2 baskets woven together at the top. The first one is a funnel that they go through, and then they're caught, and this is the funnel, and then they're caught in the basket that's beneath them. And there's a place always left, an opening left, where you can pull one up, sort of pull them apart, reach your hand in and pull the fish out. Another one of the men's baskets. Men often are making these big baskets in part because they have more strength in their wrists and their arms and fingers. And so you're using really big branches to make these. This is an acorn storage basket. And again, hundreds of pounds of acorns are stored in these. Baskets are really strong, good tools. And they are up off the ground, so a lot of animals can't get into it. And it's got that sort of thatched roof to shed the rain. And it's got openings in the basket so that the air circulates through it and that they're kept dry. They're not going to mildew or mold because of moisture being trapped in there. Again, another kind of these rough baskets that men are making. In this case, it's a basket to carry wood in. Again, other kinds of twine baskets. This is a basket for storing food. You want those openings for the air to circulate. Another kind of these twine baskets that are used often like a colander is today. So often these openings are so water can drain out. Another kind of carrying baskets to carry really small things in this case. This is for gathering seeds that were sort of native plant and grass seeds that were used much like we use different sorts of grains or flours today. And this is Cecilia Joaquin from Hopland Rancheria, who's using one of those kinds of baskets along with this spoon-shaped basket called a seed beater. And you're holding that basket, you're using the seed beater to hit ripe seeds off of their stems, and they're ready to release. They fall into that basket. But in this process, while you're doing that, and you're filling your basket of edible food, you're also, not all those seeds are going to fall exactly in there. They're sort of also going to fall on the ground in front. And so one of the things that you see happening is Native women, by harvesting these grasses, actually increase the size of their kind of colony. So you increase the number of the plant that you want, and that's feeding you. In harvesting it, you're also helping it increase its numbers and spread. And just, these are beautiful baskets. Just wanted to show you another one of them. And again, we're just going to run through some more of these baskets. The basket, this is a woman from Ukiah Rancheria, about 1890. The basket that's behind her, she used to gather acorns in, a major food gathered in the fall. And you see those acorns in front of her, and she's using that rock and a rock she's holding in her hands to shell the acorn. And then she is putting it into this sort of tray-looking basket off to her left-hand side there. Basket like this. So just other sorts of baskets being used to harvest and process food. And then next thing you're going to do with those nuts is to pound them into a flour. And you're using a special, which is what this woman here is doing. And you're using a special kind of basket called a mortar basket or a pounding basket. And you're using it in conjunction with stone pestle. And you can see it's got a hole in the bottom, and that is deliberately constructed that way so that it's like the walls of a blender. You put that on a flat rock, you put the mortar basket on top, and the rock on the mortar and the rock surface of the pestle, those are used and meet when you pounding the nuts. And all the basket is doing is keeping the nuts from flying away as you're pounding them. It's like the walls of a blender in terms of keeping things enclosed and funneling it back down. And then other steps in processing acorn. This is when you take that flour, which you've ground in your mortar basket, and you are now sifting it so that you keep the fine flour, and the bigger pieces of the nuts you're saving so that you're re-grinding those. And this is, again, you're just doing that by tapping the basket. The fine flour goes over the edge, and you can see that is right in front of her, and then off to her side is the little tray basket that has the bigger pieces that need to be reground. And then you're taking that flour, and I think most people know this, you are then being able to leach to take the tannic acid, which is in acorn, and will make your stomach upset if you eat it, and it will taste very bitter. So people don't want to eat it. So to make it edible, you have to get that tannic acid out, and you take the acorn flour and you spread it in a sand lined pit like this, and you pour water over it, and the water draws that tannic acid out into the sand below it. And so you just do that until it tastes what my grandma used to call sweet. And really it's not sweet like sugar, it's just not bitter. And then that is what you use to cook. And she's taking, this has been leached. This is Essie Parrish. And she's taking the acorn flour out, putting it into that tray basket beside her. And then she's going to be cooking it in the basket that looks like the big bowl. And that is how you cook acorn mush, that flour, into kind of a porridge. You add hot stones and the water, and you stir it around with that sort of loopy thing that's used to stir the mush around and keep those hot stones, really, really hot stones, moving so they don't burn the bottom of the basket, but the heat gets transferred to the food, and it makes it boil. And she's also cooking some greens there. She's using that other basket to cook wild greens to have with the mush. And these are cooking baskets, storage baskets. Just give you an idea again of how big some of those kinds of baskets can be. And we're going on, because I'm running out of time, we're going to be going on to, and these are actually fun. These are just like a mini set of toy twine baskets, the sort of thing that you would give little girls to play house with. You can see all those big kind of baskets in mini form. And then we're going on to coiled baskets, the other main way to make a basket. Instead of your foundation material, your foundation material is kind of running vertically. Now they're going to start to run horizontally. And instead of this whole sort of all these spokes of the foundation rods, running all around in a circle, you just, in this case, have one foundation rod, and it is used to build up the walls as you make coil after coil after coil, one on top of another, and you're using their sewing weaving material to sew one level of that foundation to the level that is being laid on top of it. So hopefully you can see that in this picture. This is Laura Summersall again, sort of showing how this is done. She's working on a one rod, what we call a one rod coil basket or a one stick basket. And it's because it just has one foundation rod. And you can see this kind of needle looking thing that she's holding, and that's an awl. Now we use metal awls. We used to use bone awls made out of deer bone before, and it's just a sharp pointed end that you make a hole for your weaving material to go through. You sort of slide it in, make this little opening, and then you take your weaving material, your sedge root in this case, and just stick it in and pull it through, and that ties it together. And just showing you some of the different kinds of one rod coiled baskets there can be. This is a Pomo serving tray. This is a little bowl. And there's another kind of coiling. It's 3-rod coiling, done exactly the same way, but you can see 3 of these have 3 sticks in them as the foundation. And then there's this one little one with a dark foundation. That's the 1-rod. And I'm hoping you can see the difference this makes in the texture of it. 3-rod coiled baskets have this real kind of bumpy corrugated surface. And often, they're decorated sort of elaborately with the addition of feathers and beads. And here's that corrugated surface up close. And I'm hoping you can see the difference in these baskets. One of them is a 1-rod, the one in the back that has smooth wall to it. And then the one in the front, the smaller basket, is a 3-rod coil basket. And this is a kind of a form of Pomo basketry that's fairly unique to Pomo people. And it's what we call a boat basket, because it looks sort of like a canoe or a boat. And a lot of times coiled baskets are less the sort of baskets that are used for everyday tasks, and more often form a social currency. They're the sort of baskets that are sort of especially elaborate, especially beautiful, often just given at life occasions that are particularly important. Things like births, deaths, marriages, things that are gifts of love. and are really just meant to be enjoyed. And just going to show you some of how elaborate these can get. And you'll start to see additions of a lot of the material colored material being woven into these are from various songbirds around that people are using. Pieces of their plumage woven into the fabric. And those can be, in this one, you just have sections of it. It's sort of what we call spot feathered. So you have these intermittent sort of pieces, and then you can start to have ones that are totally covered. The surface is totally covered with patterns, designs made out of these different colored feathers. So they almost look like the bird themselves. And I'm just going to show you some of these. You can see they're often elaborately decorated, and these start to become more like almost like mobiles. So they have a handle that they're hung from. They have dangles coming down, and because they aren't hung up, and that's the inside of them where there's no pattern at all. All the pattern is woven on the outside with the feathers, and they're hung up by these handles. They tend to spin. And so you get this real sense of movement from them with all these dangles hanging down. And you're looking up at them from the bottom. And just wanted to show you where some of those colors come from. This is that little patch. This is an acorn woodpecker. And that little patch on the top of his head, that is that red color that's woven into the baskets. Here's a close-up of another one, and you'll see this yellow patch. And that comes from the breast of a meadowlark. And when you have, this is sort of, you've seen baskets that are mostly made prior to non-native people kind of coming in to the area. And essentially the world changing for Pomo people in some very unhappy ways. And essentially people are removed from their homes. They're removed from their lands. They're no longer able to make a living the way they used to, living from the natural land around them, because they didn't have access to it. It no longer belonged to them, and because it had changed so much. Instead, people had to find a way to survive and do things like make money, so that they could, all of a sudden, they had to buy their food. They had to find housing. They had to they had to sort of survive in a world that had totally changed. And one of the ways that they actually ended up making money, one of the things that baskets allowed them to do, basket making allowed them to do, is to sell their work to non-native people who really started to admire it, and it became a fad around starting in the early 1890s by non-native people to collect Native American art, and especially baskets and pots and textiles to decorate their homes with. And so things were made by Native people, not for Native use anymore, but for a non-Native market. And they had all these new things coming into their world that they'd never seen before. So this is a hat, a brimmed hat that it's about the size of a doll hat that a Pomo weaver made, like something totally new. They're experimenting with baskets to see if they can replicate it. Here's a teacup that gets made. by a basket maker. You can see this kind of goblet form, again, totally something new that basket makers are seeing and replicating. And they also are incorporating new materials that are coming with these new people. So these are glass, European glass beads that are brought in, and native weavers really see the potential in using beads the same way that they used feathers to incorporate into the fabric of a basket and to make these colorful patterns with, but much easier to acquire in a way. You don't have to, some of the baskets that you saw, those are hundreds of birds in that basket. Easier to buy if you have the money to just buy the beads. So people start to adapt and change. And sort of a new kind of basket is born. And first you see sort of beads incorporated into the feather baskets, and then you see these totally beaded baskets emerge. And I am probably gonna stop here because I know I am running out of time, and ask if there's questions. And I haven't been keeping track of the Q&A, but I think somebody has.
Well, thank you, Sherrie. Wow, what beautiful photos.
Oh,
And
well, easy when you have beautiful material.
and I understand more about pomo baskets and the materials used in making them. Also learn how to harvest the root from cut grass and the bark from redbud plant. And I just wanted to let you know, by the way, as a chef, I really like the mortar basket. I think it's genius. And I also love the photos of you, especially with your grandma Lucy. So anyway, I just want to let you know, thank you. And now it's time for Q&A. And our first question is from Gina Scudellari. She said, "Thank you for this presentation. I'm an artist who is environmentally sensitive based upon your description. It sounds as if this method is wonderfully environmentally positive, mutually beneficial. Even, I think there's a missing word there, and it says, is this by design?"
Yes, I mean, I would say Pomo basket makers had a beneficial effect on the environment around them. I mean, it was seen as this, so Pomo people really sort of had a different view of their place in the world than I would say is true in modern society today. And I think it's something that would sort of behoove us to go back to, which is that they saw themselves as not the what do I want to say? They saw themselves as having a role to play in terms of helping to keep the world healthy, helping to keep the world that essentially it's very much, let me put it this way, it's very much a view of the world as being a gardener, that you are tending the world around you. And it's not just that, but the world around you is enabling you, is tending you as well. It's enabling you to live. And that it's a cycle of reciprocity instead of a cycle of exploitation, I guess. you knew that your survival depended on the health of the world around you. And you work to you work to sustain that. So I think the whole process of basket makers tending their plants and the plants providing all this material then for the basket maker to make essentially the tools of life that they needed, as well as an art form that sustained them. I think one of the things I didn't talk about much is one of the things you can see in Pomo baskets is the amount of time that Pomo people had to perfect, really develop and perfect this art form. They were not living on the cusp of survival, I think is how hunting and gathering people are often perceived, as just sort of barely hanging in there and sort of always being on the edge of falling off the cliff and dying, by starvation or all these other things. Actually, here in California, there are so many resources available in the world around them, and people were so good at being able to know how to work with that environment to harvest the resources they needed, that there is a lot of free time, much more leisure time than we have today. And you can see that in the sort of art that people are filling their lives with. And a lot of the kinds of baskets I was showing you, the twine baskets that you're using in essential tasks, are extremely beautiful. That doesn't make them any more functional. It takes a lot more time to, sort of put all that design into it, that thought into it of how to make it better and how to make it more beautiful. And I think it tells you something about how art and beauty, sort of in mastery of your craft, was valued by the community and by the makers, and how in some ways that sense of creativity and artistry is, I think, innately satisfying to humans. So there's that side of it too.
Thank you for answering that question. Here's another question regarding the process of making a basket. Question is, how do they connect the shorter pieces of sedge together to make a long piece?
Good question. And I'm going to see, I have some baskets here with me. And essentially so I'm going to see if I can show you something that you can, it's not going to be close enough that you can see. Essentially, you have ways that you, sort of like when you're knitting, you have ways that you can start and sort of almost knot it in, and just continue it. So the sedge root just is, we call it splicing, you splice it in. And the same with the foundation rods in coiled baskets. They're sort of tapered down on one end, and the one that's being inserted is tapered down, and then you go around them and they cross over and they're sort of bound together and they hold together. So there's definitely different techniques when you're adding material, and you always have to add material. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And the next one is,
and I would say too, one of the things about Pomo baskets was the real sort of striving to hide. So you have a part of the basket where the pattern is the most perfect. It's usually on the outside of the basket. It's like when you're embroidering something, and on the top, is beautiful. And then on the bottom, if you're a crafter, a lot of times what you want to see is the underside. So you see how neat they are on the bottom. And I know with pomo baskets, you're always told that you want to make it so that you can never see any of it. You never want to be able to see the kind of the parts where you're knotting things off, or you want it all to be perfect everywhere you look.
Great. Now I have a question that here from Kathy King, and her question is one of the questions I have in my mind. So this is great. The question is, how did they make the designs? Are there special Pomo designs?
The designs are really in your mind. And I would say one of the things about pomo baskets is that in contrast to some other tribal traditions where there's kind of a set repertoire. So there's, 12 standard designs, and they're sort of repeated, combined in different ways, but it's sort of standardized and you can learn it. Pomo baskets and weavers are really encouraged to be endlessly creative. I think that's why it's interesting to see what happens when they're introduced to kind of new sorts of things when non-native people come in the area. So it's not just new shapes, new objects, but also these new designs. So they start to copy, there's baskets, pomo baskets woven with, I've seen them with birds, I've seen them with trees, I've seen them with cows, I've seen them with horses, it's with letters, you start to see English letters being woven into them. There's one of my favorite baskets it was woven for somebody, one of the pomo men that went off in World War II, and it has the Air Force emblem insignia woven on it, and I think it's Gowan Air Force Field. I mean, it's actually, got the base where he was stationed and the division of the Army, of the Air Force that he was in on it. So they copied that. People are incorporating all these new things that they're seeing. And I think that creativity is a real hallmark of pomo basketry. Weavers felt free to dream up something new and combine things in many, many, many different ways. And it was all carried in your mind. And so one of the things about basketry that I don't know, unless you've tried to do it, that people have really know, is that when you start in the basket, you should, at the very beginning, be able to see it as it's finished. So you have an idea of what the finished product is, and you have to be able to break that down in your mind into all the component steps. So go back and switch back and forth between those as you're making it. It's good for the brain. And you don't write it down, and it's not a formula, you have to figure it out.
Thank you for explaining that. And I have another question about design. Actually, we have two questions about design. And I know Lori Howard is waiting here. So are those peg markers for design? That's pegs, P-E-G-S, peg markers. Are those for design purposes?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Sorry.
Okay, so I'll ask Lori if you could please send us an explanation to your question in the down here in the Q&A, and I'll get back to you, Lori. Thank you. So the next question is, what are the small round white beads I saw them also in, I lost it. I
Yeah,
saw
no,
it also
they're,
in the dowry picture.
yeah,
Was
there's something like this and this one.
yeah.
Yeah. So those are, it's our form of money. And so they're made from clamshells, Washington clamshells.
Yeah.
And they're kind of maybe like puka shells, you know, people had
Yes.
those necklaces. So they were these kind of round discs that were formed from the clamshell and then strung onto, you know, strung together, and then the edges are all polished. So they're just these smooth, flat discs, and they're a form of currency. So they're traded for different goods. But it's kind of a marker of, it's like putting dollar bills, I mean, like silver dollars, say, on a basket. So especially the ones that are given as gifts, it's just a way to make them especially valuable and fancy.
Thank you for answering that question. The next one is, may I ask what the basket covered in feathers would have been used for? Would it had been for a special life cycle moment? So this is
Yeah,
the
usually those are really for special occasions. It takes a long time, and so again, you know, all of those feathers represent birds, lots of them. That's so, and that's usually something that the men were harvesting. So it just takes a while to accumulate all of those feathers. And so there's a lot of kind of time built into sort of amassing that. And so it's not just weaving the basket itself, but harvesting all of those. And then it's the sort of thing that's a special effort. So there's not that, it's made rarely. It's not one of the kinds of baskets you're making all the time usually. And so, yes, it's usually used often for those special occasions, and including in some cases in ceremonial contexts. And they're treasured. Yeah, they're treasured. And yeah, I would, and interestingly enough, once the market for native baskets comes along, because those are just so beautiful, they're one of the kinds of baskets that starts to be made a lot more often to sell, because that's what buyers want.
Great. Well, thank you. I think we have time for just one more question, and the next question is, what's a way to support Pomo basket makers today near our county? And she's referring to Marin County.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I'm glad to say, you know, in my lifetime, I've seen pommel baskets and basket makers, you know, virtually almost disappear. And there's a real renaissance today. I'm glad to have lived long enough to have seen that. Part of it is the work of some of the basket makers like Laura Summersall and Elsie Allen, who were just a handful of makers, I'm going to say in the 60s, 70s, 80s, that really worked to teach everybody they could. They really understood the importance of making sure that tradition went on. And I would say the other thing that's really helped Pomo Indian basketry are the casinos, because as the tribes have become, and a number of the Pomo tribes do have modest casinos, but as they've had more economic means, they've really devoted it to helping revive basket making in their community. So today there's just a number of young weavers that are doing some fabulous work and really reviving it. So I have a good, if I had to make a prediction, I think basket making is in a better place than it has been, Pomo basket making, for quite a while. It's not very visible. So one of the things that's happened is Pomo basket making used to be Native people using it for Native purposes. And then Pomo basket making was Native people using it to be able to make a living. And I would say today, Pomo basket making has turned back into being something that Native people are doing for Native purposes. They're not selling it. You don't see it coming up, contemporary basket makers work coming up on the market hardly at all. And that's because you could do anything, and I'm saying anything, as a job and get more return for your hourly time than making the basket. There's just no way it takes so long. There's just no way that you're gonna sort of get a monetary return that makes it worth doing. You're doing it for cultural and social reasons. And so you're doing it as gifts for the family. You're doing it for community purposes, and it's staying in the community.
Thank you very much. And that is the end of our program. And thank you to all the viewers, and especially to our speaker today, Dr. Sherrie Ferri Smith. And I feel like I need to go back again to the Grace Hudson Museum. If you want to see the baskets in flesh, it's in the museum, and it's a wonderful exhibit. Would like to say that there's another wonderful webinar coming up on February 15. Please tune in. And it's McLean Bennett is the program chair. And the title is the Wolfgang series. And the director will be talking about the movie. And that's it for now. And I hope you enjoyed the program. Thank you very much.